Introduction. When a birthday became a sentence. For millions of young Americans, their date of birth, the most personal and seemingly innocent detail of their biography, was suddenly transformed into a ticket in a state lottery, an instrument for distributing life and death. It was the worst gift their government could ever bestow. A 19-year-old gazes at a calendar on the wall. The date circled in red, his birthday, would become either his salvation or a direct ticket to the front lines in Vietnam. This unprecedented gamble took place on December 1st, 1969, when the United States, for the first time since 1942, held a national draft lottery in a live televised broadcast. The focus was the fate of all unmarried men, born between the years of 1944 and 1950. The nation watched as a large glass drum was loaded with 366 capsules, each containing a single possible birth date. The order in which they were drawn would determine the priority for military conscription. The drama of the moment was amplified by the interruption of the broadcast. Instead of the popular sitcom Mayberry RFD, Americans watching CBS saw the correspondent Roger Mudd, who reportedly commented on the ceremony in a near whisper. It was he who announced at the start of the broadcast, "Tonight, for the first time in 27 years, the United States has again started a draft lottery." When the first capsule was pulled, it assigned the most immediate and highest risk. The date September 14th meant automatic priority in the draft queue. Each subsequent number, drawn from the drum, determined the next group of potential draftees. For the young men involved in the 1969 lottery, the critical line was the number 195. This was the highest number that was actually called up for service. Any date that received a number higher than 195 meant complete freedom from military service. In an instant, on live television, the birthdays of millions were transformed from a personal celebration into a decisive state sentence. Chapter 1. Backstory. Why the lottery was needed. By the late 1960s, American society was deeply fractured. Mass protests against the Vietnam War were escalating, fueled by accusations that the existing draft system was not merely unfair, but class-biased. The poor were sent to die, while the rich remained in colleges. Society demanded at least the appearance of justice. Prior to the lottery, the conscription system was decentralized and opaque. It was managed by approximately 4,000 local draft boards, and each board established its own rules, leading to the observation that 4,000 draft boards developed 4,000 very different policies. This system created a glaring class disparity that ignited public anger. Statistics showed that around 80% of servicemen deployed in Vietnam came from working class or poor families. Meanwhile, in the late 1960s, student deferments allowed affluent families to reliably keep their sons away from the war. It is estimated that these deferments alone increased college enrollment by 4 to 6%. To secure an exemption, wealthy families went as far as hiring doctors and psychiatrists to falsify medical certificates of unsuitability for service. Rumors circulated that some young men obtained fake National Guard service documents for $5,000. In the fall of 1969, university campuses were restless. Students picketed outside the rector's house, holding signs that read, "Hell no, we won't go." They knew their less privileged peers were already on the front lines, while they themselves remained protected by their student IDs. The introduction of the lottery was the government's attempt to respond to this social demand by eliminating the obvious unfairness of the old corruptible system. Chapter 2. December 1st, 1969. The night, a glass drum. Decided fates. On the evening of December 1st, 1969, the entire nation held its breath. Approximately 850,000 young men across the country, along with their families, gathered around their televisions and radios to witness the historic procedure. On the stage stood a transparent glass drum, inside of which were capsules containing the birth dates. The first capsule was drawn by Congressman Alexander Perney, the ranking Republican of the House Armed Services Committee. Inside was the date September 14th. This first draw became the most dreadful sentence, assigning the first birthday in the draft queue. President Nixon insisted that youth participate in the process, intended to create the appearance of fairness and impartiality. Thus, after the first drawing, delegates from youth advisory councils across the states approached the drum, each pulling out 5 to 6 capsules. However, not everyone accepted this role. 4 to 5 young delegates refused to draw capsules, believing they were being used for a political show. One of them, David L. Fowler from the District of Columbia, was instructed not to pull numbers, but came to the microphone, announced his position, and left the stage. Nevertheless, Selective Service Director General Louis B. Hershey stood and shook his hand. Eyewitness Stephen Robbins recalled that night. I clearly remember walking back to my room on a cold evening in Columbus after taking an Accounting 101 exam. I knew the lottery was taking place, but didn't give it much thought. Getting drafted was something that happened to other guys, not me. He received number 40. A college men's dorm common room was packed, with many standing. During the drawing, there was absolute silence. When a date within the first 100 was announced, one guy silently stood up and left the room. No one followed him with their eyes. All watched the screen. In this tense atmosphere, even anecdotal details became poignant. One student recalled his father, born September 4th, experiencing a rush of adrenaline when he heard September 14th, before he caught the full ending of teenth. Chapter 3. The Randomness Scandal. The lottery that was not random. Immediately after the broadcast, statisticians began to notice anomalies. Birthdays, especially those falling toward the end of the year, November-December, received disproportionately low and thus more dangerous numbers. It turned out the capsules had been poorly mixed. The verified facts confirmed the suspicions. The capsules were stacked sequentially in the glass drum by month, starting with January due to insufficient mixing. The autumn and winter dates remained closer to the surface, leading to their early and dangerous extraction. A statistical test showed that the probability of such an outcome occurring by true chance was less than 0.05%. The p-value was practically zero. As early as January 1970, a group of statisticians and politicians officially accused the system of failing the principle of randomness. They demanded congressional hearings and a redraw. The problem was evident. For instance, only 5 days in December, the 2nd, 12th, 15th, 17th, and 19th, received numbers higher than the final call-up number of 195. With a truly uniform distribution, there should have been 14 such lucky days. The front-page headline of the New York Times on January 4th, 1970, declared, "Statisticians charge draft lottery was not random." Rumors circulated that this was intentional manipulation, though the White House categorically denied any accusations of dishonesty, attributing the failures to the incompetence of the organizers. Despite the compelling statistical evidence, the courts rejected demands to conduct the lottery again. Learning from the errors, authorities engaged professional statisticians for the 1971 and 1972 lotteries to guarantee complete randomization and avoid a repeat of the scandal. Chapter 4. Reactions from euphoria to despair. The night of the drawing became a moment of sharp, almost physical drama, experienced in thousands of living rooms and dormitories across America. Watching the broadcast, young men felt the full spectrum of emotions, from euphoria to despair. College campuses, where absolute silence reigned during the drawing, organized collective viewings. Entire cohorts learned their fates simultaneously, as eyewitnesses recalled, when someone's date was called within the first 100, the person silently left the room. Contrasting stories illustrate how the lottery divided a generation. For instance, Donald Trump received number 356. His birthday was June 14th, which was virtually guaranteed exemption. He could sleep soundly. On the other hand, those who drew low numbers faced an inescapable reality. One eyewitness with number 30 recalled, "Since 1969, I have been telling friends that the only lottery that I have ever won was the 1969 draft lottery. My number came up quickly. I knew that from that moment on, my life's highest priority was dealing with the draft and the Vietnam War. School, family, and friends took a back seat." The most emotionally heavy story was that of Stephen Robbins, who received number 40. He recalled, "When I got back to my room, all the guys were huddled around the set in the TV room. I looked briefly at it, couldn't find my birthday, and went to bed, secure in the knowledge that I would not be drawn." On the morning of December 2nd, however, I got a call from my mother. All I could hear was her crying. One mother started calling her son immediately after hearing his number, 40, but cried into the phone, unable to speak. A vivid scene from that night. A middle-class living room. A family is gathered around the television. The mother clutches her hands. The father, a World War II veteran, is silent. The 19-year-old son watches the screen motionless. His date is announced, number 62. The mother covers her face with her hands. The father places a hand on his son's shoulder. "We'll figure it out, son." This lottery did not just decide fates. It instantly shifted life priorities and plans. Even anecdotal details of the time were steeped in irony and tension. One student recalled that his father was born on February 29th, the 366th day of the year, but the irony was that the father had already served in the Air Force before the lottery was conducted. For tens of thousands of young men, the announcement of their number marked the beginning of a long, agonizing struggle with the conscription system. Chapter 5. Ways to avoid the draft. From legal to desperate. After the glass drum delivered its verdict, thousands of young Americans who received low numbers entered a race against time to find a way to avoid conscription. Their actions ranged from perfectly legal to desperate and even self-mutilating, clearly demonstrating how class inequality continued to operate even under the new system. Overall statistics reveal the scale of avoidance. Out of approximately 27 million draft-age men, about 15.5 million received deferments or exemptions. This enormous number reflects the full spectrum of avoidance methods. One of the most common legal avenues was enrolling in college to extend a student deferment, or obtaining conscientious objector status. 170,000 individuals were granted this status. Yet for those unable or unwilling to go to war, there were also more radical measures. The most dramatic method was fleeing the country. Approximately 20,000 to 30,000 young men fled to Canada, and an additional 12,000 deserters also settled there. On the other hand, some chose direct confrontation with the law, like the boxer Muhammad Ali, who was convicted in June 1967 for refusing the draft, stating, "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong." His stand became a powerful symbol of the anti-war movement. Julian Bond said of Ali, "His stand reverberated through the whole society. You could hear people talking about it on street corners. It was on everyone's lips. People who had never thought about the war before began to think it through because of Ali." Ultimately, 3,300 people chose prison over service. At medical examinations, draftees resorted to the most extraordinary schemes. Some wore women's underwear to medical exams to pretend to be homosexual, which was a basis for exemption at the time. Some arrived at the induction center in diapers. The musician Ted Nugent made conflicting claims about avoiding service. In a 1977 High Times interview, he claimed to have stopped bathing and defecated on himself to appear unfit for service. However, in a 2018 appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience, he denied these stories, claiming he invented them for shock value. His selective service records show he received student deferments initially and was classified 1Y, fit only in national emergency after failing his August 1969 physical, later receiving a 4F classification. There were also unconfirmed rumors of self-mutilation. One alleged account described a draftee going to Tijuana, Mexico, and having a crippling operation on his knees, though such extreme cases were not well documented. Class disparity was evident even in the rumors. Stories circulated that schools intentionally slow-walked, informing the government about students who dropped out to prolong their deferments. A final vignette. The Canadian border, winter 1970. A young American with a backpack crosses the checkpoint. A Canadian officer looks at his documents. "Are you a draft dodger? Does it matter?" In Canada? No, it doesn't. The young man takes his first free breath in months. Chapter 6. The Price of Luck. Psychological Consequences. The 1969 lottery became not only an instrument of conscription, but also a powerful, natural experiment for sociologists, allowing them to study how government policy directly transforms citizens' political beliefs. The fateful number drawn from the glass drum altered the political views of an entire generation, and for some, it brought severe psychological consequences, regardless of whether they went to Vietnam or not, research showed. Young men who received low numbers, those facing conscription, became more anti-war, more liberal, and tended to vote for Democrats compared to those protected by high numbers. This effect, caused by direct government intervention in personal lives, persisted even decades later, in surveys conducted in the 1990s. The lottery number's effect on political views exceeded the influence of partisan identification formed during adolescence. In essence, the threat of conscription turned a potential soldier into an ardent opponent of the war. However, even those who avoided service thanks to deferments or high numbers did not escape negative repercussions. Among those who received dangerous numbers, there was an increase in suicides and anxiety disorders. The general worry, typical for 19-year-olds in 1970, was expressed in an eyewitness quote. "I remember being very worried I did not want to be drafted." The future plans, careers, and personal lives of many were put on hold. Even those who avoided service experienced negative consequences. Employment opportunities were limited. Future plans had to be put on hold, revised, or abandoned altogether. The constant threat of conscription created unbearable stress. A vivid scene. 1971. A college town, two friends sit in a cafe. One has number 330. He is calm, planning his career. The other has 45. He hasn't shaved in 3 weeks, his eyes red from insomnia. I can't think about anything else, man. Every morning I wake up and think, is today the day I get the letter? Thus, the lottery generated not only joy and despair, but also survivor's guilt among those saved by high numbers, as well as a profound shift in political consciousness. It became a moment when the state, through pure chance, directly shaped the worldview of an entire generation. Chapter 7. The End of an Era. Last lotteries and the end of the draft. Following the 1969 scandal involving poor randomization, the Selective Service took steps to improve the system's credibility. Subsequent drawings in 1970, 1971, and 1972 were conducted with improved randomization involving professional statisticians. Nevertheless, this lottery of death was coming to an end. The last lottery-based induction was in December 1972. Soon after came a historic decision that changed American military policy. In 1973, the draft in the US officially ended, and the country transitioned to an all-volunteer force. Even the lotteries conducted after 1972 did not lead to actual conscriptions. As the United States was already actively withdrawing from Vietnam, a total of about 2.2 million people were drafted during the entire war years. Out of approximately 27 million eligible men, 2.2 million were drafted while 8.7 million volunteered. Notably, out of the 307,276 men called up in 1970, only 162,746 actually entered service. The rest avoided induction for various reasons. Registration with the Selective Service was suspended in 1975, but 5 years later, in 1980, it was reinstated, although no draft has been conducted since. Historians believe that despite President Nixon's attempt to make the draft a fair show, the introduction of the lottery did not solve the issue of fairness, and arguably only intensified the outrage of war opponents. The wealthy still found ways to evade service. Muhammad Ali later articulated this class disparity precisely, stating, "The government had a system where the rich man's son went to college and the poor man's son went to war. Then, after the rich man's son got out of college, he did other things to keep him out of the army until he was too old to be drafted." What did this lottery teach the country? It demonstrated that even the most meticulously designed system based on chance cannot overcome deeply rooted social inequality. The lottery became a vital lesson. It led to the abolition of the draft and the transition to an all-volunteer military, a final image. The Selective Service Archive, present day. A dusty box of 1969 documents. Inside is a list of 366 dates. Opposite each is a number of simple figures that decided the fates of nearly 1 million young men. Some returned as heroes. Some, broken. 58,000 never returned at all. And it all began with a glass drum and a live broadcast on December 1st, 1969. Epilogue. The legacy of the lottery. Even decades after the abolition of the draft, memories of the Vietnam War lottery remain vivid and painful. For the generation that lived through that night, the lottery became a symbol of the war's absurdity, the system's injustice, and the unpredictable, cruel power of the state over private lives. the lottery's legacy endures in people's minds. Eyewitnesses and former registrants attest, most men remember their number to this day. These 3 digits received on live television have been permanently etched into consciousness as a code of fate. An indicator of how deeply this experience has penetrated the collective memory is the fact that a dedicated website, VietnamWoordraftlottery.com, still exists, where people continue to share the stories behind their lottery numbers and recount how these figures altered their lives. For them, it is not merely a historical fact, but a personal defining line. As Denny Friedenrich stated, "What's important to understand is this was life and death." The 1969 lottery was a unique, unprecedented moment in the history of the United States. It was the moment when the government, in a live broadcast, transformed the birthdays of millions of young men into tickets to war. This open yet flawed demonstration of chance exposed the class and social fissures in society, showing that even with the appearance of fairness, the wealthy could find loopholes. Ultimately, the lottery led to a radical reform, the end of conscription, and the transition to an all-volunteer military. It left behind a generation whose political consciousness was forever altered by just a few capsules in a glass drum. Final thought. The 1969 lottery, which decided the fates of nearly 1 million people based on their date of birth, will forever remain in history as the worst birthday gift imaginable.